Hello and welcome to another First Draft podcast and video from Fantasy Football Scout. My name is Tom and today I'm joined by someone who is all over the place at the minute on the official podcast. She's on her own YouTube channel, FPL Family, but today she's on ours and I'm pleased to welcome Sam. Sam, how are you doing?
I'm really well, thank you, Tom. A bit busy, but always got time for a bit of a team reveal with you.
Amazing stuff. How have you found building your first drafts, and is it harder, easier than you thought?
So I obviously get them just slightly earlier than everybody else because I have to build them for the official pod, which comes out just ahead of launch every year. So I spent a lot of the day on Tuesday building squads and then trying to decide which one I was going to talk about on the official podcast. And it was really hard. Like, I found this year probably one of the hardest that I've done. And that's in part, well, for a number of reasons. One, it's the pricing and the fact that HAALAND is so expensive. And if you want to have SALAH as well, it throws the budget massively across the rest of the squad. But also because there's a lot of uncertainty with Copa America and the Euros having been this summer in terms of like, how quickly are these players coming back? How much of a break are they getting? Because some of them looked absolutely exhausted by the end of those tournaments. So are they getting much of a break? When are they due back in training? What does that mean for their involvement in game week 1? And then throw into that mix, we've also got the Olympics, of course, which finishes, I think the football finishes on something like the 9th of August. So given then you've got just until the 16th, so a week ahead of the start of the Premier League season, we will see perhaps a little bit of uncertainty around the players that are going there. Maybe the likes of Mateta, who I think is off to play for France at the Olympics. So there's a lot of uncertainty this season, and that makes for some difficult decisions heading into the first draft, and I think will make for some increasingly difficult decisions the closer we get to game week 1.
For sure. Right, so what we're going to do first, we're going to, as we've been doing on all these first draft videos, we're going to get a bit of fan perspective. And Sam, unfortunately for me, as a Chelsea fan, is a Spurs fan.
Yay!
So we'll get the latest on Spurs and what she thinks of the player prices. But make sure you drop a like on the video and make sure you subscribe to the channel for plenty more first drafts to come this week. So let's get into Spurs. Right, so on the podcast, for the podcast listeners, on the screen there is a table showing the key Spurs FPL assets, attackers and defenders. It's got their expected goal involvement, the number of starts, shots on target, which is applicable for the new bonus point system, and fouls won, which is also one of the changes they made to the bonus point system. And just a few stand out for the podcast. Son is top for the XGI. Well clear of Brennan Johnson in second and Maddison in third. Maddison's fouls won is extremely high, 74. The next highest is 39 from Son. So that's something to ask Sam about. And the most attacking defender on there is unsurprisingly Porro with an XGI of almost 9, with Romero behind him on 5. So Sam, we'll start with the attackers. Son is obviously top. He's the premium asset on penalties. But where do you see Johnson and Maddison coming in behind him with the potential to save a lot of money?
Yeah, I think that's going to be the thing, isn't it? Like, obviously, if your budget is not an issue because you've decided that this time around you're going to go without HAALAND and without SALAH, and therefore you can have what looks on paper to be a glorious midfield of Son, Palmer, Foden, Saka, all of those big guys, because you don't want to go for the really, really expensive ones, then you are going to have to look for some budget enabling picks. And I think that will mean that Son's ownership stays relatively low this season, and actually he could be a bit of a differential for managers that want to go there. Behind them, Brennan Johnson and James Maddison, and I think there's pros and cons for both of those two. When you look at Maddison, as you said, won 74 fouls last season in his 26 matches, because obviously he did miss a chunk of the season as well through injury, so you'd expect that number to have been even higher had that injury not come about against your boys back in, I think it was game week 11, and it kept him out for quite a long time. And because of that, obviously the number is reduced even further than you would expect it to have been by the end of the season. Now, that puts him 4th in the game last season for fouls won, so you can only expect that to have been greater. And therefore, this season, if we see, good involvement in goals, picking up assists that we saw last season, then you would think that would have a really positive impact on James Maddison's ability to pick up bonus points. What I will say is that I think Brennan Johnson of the two is my preferred in terms of his attacking output potential. I think Maddison is likely to pick up a lot of assists. Obviously, he's going to be on set pieces and that has an impact, but he won't be on all set pieces because Porro, as we saw last season, is quite good at them as well. So they will share some corners, that is, but he'll be on the free kicks. But I do love Brennan Johnson. I think, he was fairly consistent with starts last season, and I expect that to be more consistent again this time around. I would expect him to start ahead of Kulusevski over on the right-hand side with Son on the left and Richarlison in the middle, unless we go out and sign another forward. I would expect it to be Richie that starts. And again, he missed a lot of last season through injury. And not only did he miss a lot of last season through injury, but obviously he's missed Copa America this summer through injury and is back in training with Spurs. So a nice rest for him this summer. Brennan didn't travel to the Euros as well, didn't make it. Maddison was left out of the England squad. Son had a little bit of time away with South Korea, but not a lot. So this is a really nice rested Spurs attacking unit heading into the first game week of the season.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm really interested in Brennan Johnson. He only got 5 goals last year, but he had an XG of 10, which suggests he's getting in all the right positions, but we'll have to see if his finishing improves
Scored in
next
pre-season friendly already so far. We were up in Scotland playing a pre-season friendly, which we won 5-1, and he scored in that one. So, and it was a really nice bit of play with James Maddison for him to score that one. So yeah, he's in, spoiler alert for what you're about to see, he's my Spurs player of choice in the attacking players.
Yeah, interesting. We'll get onto that in a minute, but first we got to touch on the defence because the price points this year are really good, in my opinion, and really interesting. You've got Porro at 5.5, Romero and Udogie at 5, and then Van de Ven at 4.5. I was a little bit surprised about Van de Ven at 4.5, but having seen this table, which for the podcast listeners says that Van de Ven's XGI was less than 1 compared to Destiny Udogie's, which was 4.5, and Romero's, which was 5, and then Porro was 9. So he is significantly less attacking, but he is also the cheapest. So how do you see that with Porro, with them all at different price points?
So I am currently, and it will be out by the time you watch this video, writing an article on the Spurs defence for Fantasy Football Scouts. That'll be out over on the website. And it's all about the defenders for the reason that you've just described. So the Spurs defence is a lot more varied in terms of the price points than most of the other Premier League sides that we've got in FPL. We've obviously got Porro coming in at 5.5. We've then got the goalkeeper and Romero and Udogie coming in at 5. And then, as you say, Van de Ven at 4.5. There's also Dragusin coming in at 4.5. Now, he only made 4 starts last season and he came in at a time when Van de Ven was missing and we needed him. But at the back end of the season, we also did see them start together with Romero in a kind of back 3 with Porro and what would expect to be Udogie on that side in the more attacking kind of wing-backy style positions. Now, if that happens, that also kind of throws a little bit of a cat amongst the pigeons in terms of who starts where, because we'd likely to see Van de Ven move slightly further over and play on that side of that back 3. For me, I think it's all going to come down to budget. Obviously, if you've got 5.5 million, as the table shows, Porro is the standout pick to have in terms of attacking potential. And we know that he's on set pieces. He takes a lot of corners, even when Maddison is on the pitch. So if you've got 5.5 to spend, then go for it. The clean sheets last season were difficult for Spurs, and I think that will put a lot of people off spending 5.5 on Porro. We were quite good up until game week 9. There were 4 clean sheets in the opening 9 game weeks of the season for Spurs. And then injuries and suspensions meant that the back 4 just didn't play together again, really, until right at the end of the season. And then they picked up a few more clean sheets back at that point. I think it was only Romero and Porro who were on the pitch for all of the clean sheets that Spurs kept last season. And when, of course, the goalkeeper. Everyone else had some clean sheets. But I think if you get a fully fit Spurs back line, we will see better defensive security like we saw at the beginning part of last season. And I think a lot of what we remember as FPL managers of 23-24 was Spurs scoring goals but being defensively terrible. And that was a frustration for a lot of managers. Hopefully there's more clean sheets coming. But I think for me, the big question is, where do you go with the 5 million? Obviously, Romero was the highest goal scoring defender in the game last year. He scored the most goals of all the defenders. Udogie had that huge levels of attacking threat. And because of the positions that he's in, is likely to win fouls and therefore rank highly in the bonus points if Spurs keep a clean sheet, if he's involved in the goal scoring, if he assists, if he scores a goal. But you've got to pay zero point 0.5 extra for them to over Van de Ven. So it's going to depend upon how much budget you have. For me, I think Van de Ven, although he doesn't have very high XGI as we can see in that table, if he'd have started all of the games last season and we did lose him for a chunk of time as well, I think we would have seen higher and better numbers from him. Not necessarily in terms of XGI, because really, if you're getting Van de Ven, you're getting him just for his attacking threat from a set piece, because he'll go up for that, because we know that he's the most speedy man on the planet and he can get back to defend if we need to. But I like Van de Ven at 4.5. I think he offers a really nice option to get into the Spurs defence, who you also wouldn't mind benching from time to time, and he kind of fits into that rotating 4.5 player defender position really nicely. Whereas I think if you go for a Udogi or Romero, you're kind of saying I'm starting them every week, even in those difficult fixtures.
Yeah, there's lots and lots of 4.5 million defenders to consider, which we'll probably get onto later. But yeah, we got Chelsea, Villa, Newcastle, Man United, and Spurs. So there's options from top teams.
Hello there, and welcome to a short update from Fantasy Football Scout. My name is El Fozzy, and I'm here to tell you about something new and exciting that's coming to Fantasy Football Scout and to the world of fantasy very, very soon. As you'll know, if you've followed Scout for many years, as I hope you have, we've been all about championing new fantasy formats and the best fantasy games out there, wherever and however they may come. We, of course, focus squarely on the Fantasy Premier League, and we worked with the Premier League on that, and that's brilliant, and we love it, and that is our bread and butter. We also love the Champions League and Euros with the UEFA on that. We had a great time with the Euros this summer, and we're looking for the Champions League game. But now, and that's maybe our dessert, I don't know, and now we have something else. Could be our entree, I don't know, which is EFL Fantasy, or Fantasy EFL, the official name. We're working with the English Football League, the EFL, the oldest organised league in the world. 1888 was all founded, the way it all started, where British football began, on their brand new fantasy game. And it's a very different game. It's going to bring together all three divisions: the Championship, League One, and League Two, which means you get to choose each week from around about 2,000 players. 2,000 players. That is kind of, I mean, it's hard enough picking a team in FPL with so many options this year. 2,000 players to choose from. Wow, there's been some big variation there. Crucially, there's a few other changes too. Taking the 7 and 2 concept, you only get to pick 7 players each week. 2,000 to choose from, 7 to pick. Madness. Very different game, of course. The points will be probably similar to what we know, but we'll find more about that yet. But the format is obviously very different. You get to pick 7. You get to change the team. Very different. Going to be very engaged across the game week. Game weeks are slightly different. Game weeks are longer. We'll hear more about this in the coming days when the game is launched. The other thing we do know for a fact now is there are 2, as well as the 7 players, you pick 2 clubs each week to represent you. And if they win or do certain other actions, you get points. So you pick 7 players, 2 clubs, points combined, boosh. There will be chips, no doubt. There will be plenty of strategies. And that's what we're going to do, as we always do. We're going to spend our time dissecting the game, analysing the players, looking at the data, trying to find the greatest strategies and the ways to make them have the most fun and to have the most impact in this new game. And we're really pumped for it. It's coming very, very soon. And as soon as it does, we'll obviously announce it on the site. We've already announced officially, both on the EFL site and on our site, the Fantasy Football Scout, that we're partnering, teaming up with the EFL for this game. There we are. We're partners with the EFL. That is our entree. We've had the entree, we've got the main course, we've got a dessert, and now we have the entree. We have all 3. Only at Fantasy Football Scout you can engage with all this stuff. Obviously, the sites will cover it, but we are going to be the closest to this game. We're going to be all over it, and there's a lot more we're going to announce in the coming days. So stay tuned. Right now, you can go into Fantasy EFL, fantasy.efl.com. You go there right now. You can sign up. And you can get yourself, I don't know if you get an ID, but I think you get an email there. And then basically, as soon as the game is live, you'll be notified. Boom, you're in. You can start picking your team, getting your early IDs, as we all love, and then starting to read the immense content we're going to be creating for you both on Fantasy Football Scout and on the official EFL website. So yeah, look forward to telling you more about it. Stay tuned. In the meantime, back to the video.
Yeah, so we'll look at the fixtures briefly because you were talking about last season's start. Spurs had a good defensive record and they kick off with Leicester and Everton and Brentford at home in the first 5. So it could be a couple of clean sheets there, maybe.
I think so. I think there's enough potential in the defensive fixtures that we have coming up. Like you say, when you look at them, Leicester away, I mean, we don't normally keep clean sheets away at Leicester, and it's a bit of a big game, that one. Obviously, James Maddison going back to Leicester for the first time, Harry Winks playing against Spurs for the first time, so there's quite a lot on that, and I would expect that Leicester would want to get back to a good start in front of their home fans in the Premier League. So maybe I don't see a clean sheet there, but a home to Everton, I certainly would. Away at Newcastle and then at home to Arsenal are difficult fixtures, and I don't see clean sheets in those ones. But after that, Brentford, Brighton are in there, West Ham at home are in there. I think there's enough scope in those opening few weeks to think that there should be some clean sheets. And as I say, if it's Van de Ven that you've gone for, in the weeks where he's got that challenging fixture, the North London derby, it's easy enough to bench him and play a Mark Gahey, a Leif Davis, whoever it is that you want to play instead.
Yeah, there's definitely lots and lots of Spurs assets to consider for our first drafts, as we'll probably see when it comes to your team. But before we get to that, we'll just give a quick shout out to the Fantasy Football Scout members area, which you can get now for 40% off. The link is in the description below. It's not going to be cheaper for the rest of the pre-season, so now is the time. Sam, you've been talking a lot about the minutes tracker in our sort of internal meetings, and you say you've been using that a lot. So how does that help you set up for game week 1?
I think it's so important, isn't it? Because, we've talked already in this podcast about how we've seen a lot of football for a lot of players over the course of this summer break that they were supposed to be on. But with the Euros and with Copa America, we just haven't seen players getting a break yet, or a lot of players getting a break. So it's going to give us an insight. And for me, that's one of the most important things, is that you get a feel for what the managers are thinking. You get to see who's playing regularly, who's coming on and off out of the starting 11, who is getting trialling minutes, and who therefore might be in the frame to start in game week 1. And what does that mean? Because as we get further through pre-season, we'd expect those final last few pre-season matches to start to be the team that we're likely to see in game week 1. So it's really helpful. And Neil and Tom do a fantastic job of collating every single minute that is played over the course of pre-season, and all of the goals and all of the assists and the clean sheets, and it goes into one brilliant table. So if you're a Fantasy Football Scout member, you can access all of that at the click of a button, and you can see exactly who's doing what, who's getting the most minutes. And if you're trying to choose between two players, for example at Aston Villa, you've got the Bailey, you've got Morgan Rogers, you've got players that you kind of are trying to work out, are they likely to start, are they not likely to start? And you can then use that minutes tracker to work out what Emery is thinking, and it gives us a little bit of insight into what we might want to do with our teams for game week 1.
Yeah, definitely. That is super, super helpful. And that's just one of many, many features that are on there. You've got Opta data, so you can make stats tables like the one that I showed for Spurs. I just quickly made that this morning. You can put in the stats that you want, the players that you want, the teams that you want. And now we've got Statsbomb expected goals as well, which is the best model in the industry. And that's alongside our premium articles and comparison tools and Rate My Team. So you'll be able to get points projections and a team rating for your first drafts. But yeah, Sam, we'll go on to what the people have been waiting for. And this is your team. I'll first of all read this out for the podcast listeners. So in goal, you've gone for 2 4.5s in Mark Flecken and Robert Sanchez. At the back, you've got Leif Davis, Van de Ven, Mark Gahey, Esri Konsa and Saliba. In midfield, you've gone for Brennan Johnson, as you mentioned, Eze, Salah, Hutchinson from Ipswich, and Nkunku of Chelsea. It's a good pick. And then up front, you've got Haaland, Isak, and João Pedro. We should just clarify that we're recording this a couple of days out, but there are a few rumours that João Pedro may or may not have an injury, but we do think we know that he's not on the pre-season tour. So that's
there's been a few tweets going out saying that he isn't going to visit Japan for their pre-season tour, which it says the reason is unclear in a lot of the tweets. We'll have to keep an eye on that, but would be a shame because at 5.5, he's a really great enabler in that forward line. So we'll just have to kind of see where that ends up.
Yeah, for sure. So do you want to, obviously Haaland and Salah is the big standout there. We seen Joe also had Salah and Haaland in as well. Mine does as well. So what was your thinking there? Were they the first two building blocks in your team?
So generally speaking, when I start making an FPL team for the first time, I put the premium picks that I want in my team. And I like to do that by starting with a premium in every position, and then I move from there. So in this particular draft that I'm on now, I started with Haaland and Salah and Saliba as my premium defender. And then I worked out from there, trying to kind of slot in the other players that I felt were good buys and that I wanted to invest in. There are certain massive compromises in this team because I've got those three players in there. And having both Haaland and Salah in the same team does mean that we are struggling a little bit in some of the other positions. For example, there isn't an Arsenal attacker in this team, and I hate that. I really wanted to have one of those in there. There also isn't an Aston Villa attacker, and I love the Aston Villa fixtures. But I think what the plan would be with this squad is to have them for game weeks one, this team for game week 1 and game week 2, and then look to downgrade Haaland to Watkins, which would then free up the money to allow me to get an Arsenal midfielder in place of one of my cheaper options in midfield. And doing that would then feel like it would give me a bit more of a balanced squad. It would mean, of course, sacrificing Haaland. And I think the other option is that if I don't want to sacrifice Haaland, I'm a couple of game weeks into the season and we see a Luis Diaz or a Cody Gakpo or a Darwin Núñez doing particularly well for Liverpool, then Salah could be sacrificed in order to have one of them instead. And again, by doing that, if I take Salah down to a Martin Odegaard or even down to a Saka, then you can afford to upgrade the likes of João Pedro and have somebody a bit stronger in that forward line. So I think that's where my head goes when I'm trying to sort a draft for game week 1, because there's still a lot of uncertainty in game week 1, particularly with Liverpool under a new manager and with players like Gakpo going along in the Euros, with Diaz and Núñez going along in Copa America. There's a lot of uncertainty at Liverpool right now.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll start in goal. You've gone for 2 playing 4.5s. Is that the most expensive you're prepared to go? And are they designed to rotate, or will you just pick one?
Yeah, they're designed to rotate. I like a rotating goalkeeper pair. It always feels then like I have an opportunity to miss out the terrible fixture and go for somebody that's got a nicer fixture. I'll play Flecken in game week 1 rather than Sanchez against Manchester City, because I don't expect you to clean sheet in that one. And I will keep my eyes very carefully on Chelsea's pre-season, because obviously Petrovic and Kepa are also back at Chelsea. Well, Kepa's back and Petrovic is there for another season. So I'm just going to keep a close eye on who gets most minutes, and the minutes tracker again will be really useful for that. It looks like, and the rumours are, that it's going to be Sanchez, so that's why he's there. But if Petrovic gets more starts, then maybe I'll go with him instead. But yeah, for me, I don't really want to spend 5. If I spend 5, it's a set and forget, and I'd have to get a 4.0 in next to them. 5.5 is a really hard price point. Like if I could go for Pickford and a 4.0, but then I'm stuck playing Pickford even in the really, really difficult fixtures. And all right, they had 13 clean sheets last season, but is that likely to be replicated again? I think I'm going to wait and see what happens with Branthwaite, and if Branthwaite moves away, because if Branthwaite goes, I think that would rule out Pickford for me.
Yeah, if Van de Ven was 5, would you be considering Vicario to cover that Spurs defence, or
I think so.
Yeah, what do you think about Vicario as a pick?
Yeah, I think so. I think had I not had Van de Ven as an option, then Vicario might have been the way that I would have gone, because it would have allowed me to invest in Spurs. He does make a lot of saves, and I do think that Spurs were unlucky last season with the injuries that they had to their key defenders, which meant we often conceded an odd goal here or there, even when we went on to win the game. Whereas I think had we had that security of Van de Ven and Romero consistently together all season, we probably would have conceded less of those annoying 1 goal here, 1 goal there things, and those clean sheets would have probably risen from the 7 that we kept to be more in line with potentially even what Pickford did at Everton. So yeah, I think Vicario is definitely an option, but because Mickey Van de Ven is coming in at 0.5 cheaper, it's a little bit more difficult to justify the goalkeeper.
Yeah. And then looking at your outfielders, obviously what stands out to me is the fact you've got a 15-man playing squad, as opposed to you haven't got any duds on the bench. So, you could, if you were playing it differently, take Hutchinson down to 4.5, take a defender down to a 4, and then you've got 1.5 million to chuck on someone else. That's Eze to Odegaard maybe. Is that a conscious decision that you want a 15-man playing squad?
Yeah, it is. And that's only really because of the new 5 transfer rule. I think that going into the season with a 15-man playing squad allows me, hopefully, to have the luxury of not having to make a transfer for maybe the opening couple of weeks. Normally, I would roll out of 1 and into 2 anyway. But what I'm thinking now is if I've got a 15-man squad, I might even be able to roll out of 2 and into 3 if things go well to start the season. And having 3 game weeks worth of knowledge about who's starting could then put me in a really nice position to use those 3 transfers to maybe change out the Salahs, change out the Haalands, move budget around. There is definitely an option there to go with Odegaard instead. He is the Arsenal player that I'm looking at. And doing that, like you just said, would be exactly that. It would be taking Hutchinson down probably to somebody like Harry Winks, who now I've mentioned twice in this stream, but somebody along that line, the 4.5 million midfielder mark, somebody that I know is going to start. So if I do need somebody to come off the bench, at least he's going to have some points there. And then moving one of my 4.5 defenders, probably Gahey, as he was the last one I put in, down to a 4.0 starting, still get a starting defender at 4.0, but going there, because then that allows Eze, as you say, to be Odegaard. That is definitely something that's under consideration.
Yeah. And Saliba there is your premium defender. Was it close between him and Gvardiol, or maybe Van Dijk as well? How did you come to the conclusion that you wanted some Arsenal as opposed to the other big defences?
I haven't actually considered having a Liverpool defender at all. And I know they sit quite nicely on the fixture ticker, but I'm just not quite sure what we're going to see from Slot's Liverpool yet. And we didn't see consistency at the back at all last season. Like, they weren't good and they weren't solid. And there were a lot of mistakes in that back line as well, a bit like there were for Spurs. And I think if you're going to spend upwards of 6 million on a Van Dijk, a Robertson, a Trent, then you have to have that one security of starts and knowledge of where they're going to start. And I think for Trent, that's critical when he's going to cost you 7 million. But I also think that you need knowledge of how Slot's system is affecting the defence and whether we are going to see defensive solidity, which we didn't have in the 23-24 season. So I hadn't really considered Virgil at all. My other draft that I have had, as we've been going through this, did have Gvardiol. I don't love the fact that this has just got one premium defender and doesn't have a secondary one. I would like another one in there. And Gvardiol is a player that I loved owning last season. He was fantastic, and I would really like him in here. He's kind of the sacrifice that's been made by having Salah and HAALAND. And it might be that actually what I'm hoping is that we get some knowledge as we get into the season, and instead of HAALAND and Salah, maybe I can have a Diaz and a Darwin, or I can have a Foden and a Darwin, or I can have you could mix and match. Maybe Alvarez gets some good starts like we saw at the beginning of last season, and he can come in instead, and you can kind of then upgrade everyone else. And one of the first things I do with that money would be bring Gvardiol back in for sure.
Yeah. And then moving on to midfield, you've got 3 mid-price midfielders there in Nkunku, Johnson and Eze. They're all great assets in my opinion. Obviously Nkunku we've got to wait and see, but how did you, obviously they're a little bit more expensive, but Gordon, Bowen, are you annoyed you can't get to them? Or
yeah, I mean, I guess they sit in that same bracket as Odegaard. Like, I can get to them if Hutchinson becomes Harry Winks, which has happened a number of times with this particular draft that I've had, and I've kind of keep coming back to this one because I think having had Salah and Haaland get the whole summer off, no European travels, no African adventures for Salah, that I feel like I'll want to go into the season with them, particularly as a lot of their teammates have been off playing long in Copa America or whatever it is. So because I've done that, it has meant it's been a bit more challenging to get to a Bowen or a Gordon. Gordon I would really like, but the compromise I've made here is having Isak up top instead. I think having Isak means I'm more comfortable not having Anthony Gordon. But originally I did have Havertz in that Isak spot, and then that would also allow me to have an extra 0.5, and that helps on the train to getting a Gordon instead. So all of those conversations need to kind of play out. I think for me, it's ruling out the double of each team. Like, I think I want to go into the season with just one from each of these teams. So ideally I'd have one in attack from Liverpool, Man City, Spurs, Chelsea, Newcastle, Arsenal. And then as we get into the season and we see who's playing well, and because of the 5 free transfers, be able to manipulate that investment based upon the fixture runs and really try and target in on teams that are playing well with good fixtures. That feels like something that's going to come as we get, 5, 6, 7 game weeks down the track.
Yeah. Obviously, the big sort of omissions in this draft are Palmer and Watkins. At the time recording, they're the 2 highest owned players in the game. Haaland's way down in like 7th or 8th, interestingly. But yeah, are you backing Nkunku to not match Palmer, but provide the same value for 4 million less?
Yeah, it's that coverage word that we all hate, isn't it, in FPL? Like, you cannot own everybody this season, and I would have loved to have had both Watkins and Palmer in there, but it's very difficult. And I'm hoping that with Chelsea this season, last year we saw, Chelsea might have renamed themselves Cole Palmer last season, because it literally was all about him. He was everything good about Chelsea, had him stamped all over it, whether he was scoring the goal, whether he was assisting the goal, whether he was motivating and driving his teammates, all of the good stuff about Chelsea. And there was a lot of it post-Christmas. Like, we all, and I'm conscious I do it to you all the time, like, we all slate Chelsea a lot for their performances last season, but post-Christmas they were good. It's just that goes under the radar because of how bad they were in the early part of the season, and the fact that they were then chasing their tail trying to catch up with everybody else. But most of that was because of Palmer. Now, this season, under the new manager, I'm hoping that we see a bit more of a balanced Chelsea team and a bit more involvement from all of the other assets. And last season, Chelsea were unlucky. They lost Nkunku and Jackson early on. Injuries were rife across the Chelsea team for a lot of it. And you did have a number of problems. You obviously had Reece James out and Chilwell out for large parts of it. So a lot of your leaders and the players that in pre-season had really impressed then just weren't available for massive chunks of the season. So going into this one, I'm hoping that in pre-season we see the likes of Nkunku having the pre-season he had last year and having much more involvement in the way that Chelsea play. And if that happens, whilst I don't think that makes Cole Palmer a bad option, because obviously if everyone else ups their game, you would expect that he would also be a key and pivotal part of that. But maybe I can spend 4 million less and I can have Nkunku. And yes, it's going to hurt me every time Cole Palmer scores a goal, because I'm not saying I won't, but maybe Nkunku can balance out some of that pain.
Yeah, I'm with you at the minute. I've got Nkunku. But yeah, and the last player I want to touch on is Eze. How do you sort of see Palace at the minute? Because obviously Elise's been sold. Mateta could be at the Olympics, so potentially missing game week 1. Sorry, he is at the Olympics and he could miss game week 1. So are you sort of saying that Eze will step up and take the mantle, or do you think Palace could actually just be a bit worse and they might not be as good?
It's a really good question. I loved owning Crystal Palace assets last season. I had Eze and Elise and Mateta for large chunks of it. I quite often have Anderson in my FPL teams as well. He impressed me so much for England that he's in there with this draft, and obviously coming in at 4.5, so nice price point. I don't know what we're going to see from Crystal Palace. I think they're going to be a team I'm watching really carefully this pre-season. I would expect Eze to be on the penalties, because, and that's another factor that plays into this. I like having penalty takers in my team, so as many of them as possible, please. And Eze is obviously in that camp. Am I set on him? No. Do I think he could be a great option? Yes. Do I think he'll be a good differential? Yes. But I don't know if it's the right thing to do heading into game week 1, because, as you say, there are so many uncertainties with Eze going. There's still a lot of uncertainty about whether Eze will even still be at the club. There's always rumours about him moving somewhere else. Personally, don't see it. I don't see them selling Elise and Eze in the same window, particularly when they know that Mateta's away at the Olympics for most of pre-season as well. But yeah, he is a player that might stay there, might disappear. There are others in and around the 7.5-7 bracket who I think offer nice options. I'm also keeping a very, very close eye on Rodgers at Aston Villa because he started off pre-season on an absolute flyer. And if we see him regularly starting over pre-season and looking like he's going to be used in the same way that he was in chunks of last season, then maybe he's a good option. And again, if I took Eze to him, frees up budget, maybe enables Hutchinson to be an Ødegaard.
Yeah. We'll just finish on a couple of quick fire questions. So, captaincy game week 1 and 2. Are you looking at Isak and HAALAND? Because I should say on the screen, your captain João Pedro, but I assume that's a mistake.
No, that's just I haven't moved the captain's armband yet. I think for me, I'll be targeting the newly promoted. So it will either be HAALAND. Sorry, in game week 1, it'll either be Isak or Salah, and then in game week 2, it'll be HAALAND for sure.
Yeah, and then out of this draft, who would you say is unlikely to move? Obviously, no one's locking in anyone, but who's been a mainstay of all your drafts? Maybe it's a better way of phrasing it.
The 2 goalkeepers, I think as long as we see Sanchez starting, I can't see me changing those 2. HAALAND and Salah, can't see me going without either of them heading into game week 1. I think they'll both be there. Leif Davis feels like he's going to be a lock. It just feels like you don't get 18 assists and 3 goals in the Championship, come in at 4.5 and not get a spot in a team. And Saliba, I think, will be there. I can't see me moving. The only way I move off Saliba is if we see Timber absolutely storming pre-season and starting every game, because there's 0.5 to be saved if that happens. But yeah, I think otherwise everyone else could still change. Maybe Cons is a bit of a lock as well, to be fair. But everyone else is still up for moving.
None of the Spurs boys locked in yet.
Not yet. We have to wait and see. The thing is, I'm expecting Spurs to be quite active in the transfer window in terms of incoming attacking players, particularly, hopefully, a forward. And depending upon who comes in, that's when I'll start thinking about who gets locked. But there's still a lot of minutes to play this pre-season. And somebody at Spurs will stand out. At the moment, for me, it is Johnson. But there's also Archie Gray, who was really impressive. He was really, really good in that pre-season friendly we played the other night when he came on in the second half. So all eyes on Spurs. I think it could be an interesting summer deciding who I get in my FPL team.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Sam, for joining me to talk about your first draft. There's plenty more first drafts on the channel, including Mark Sutherland's, Joe and Tom Freeman, who between them have got an insane amount of top 10 and 5k finishes. So yeah, do check those out, and we'll have plenty more team reveals this week and plenty more of our other shows like the Scoutcast, like the Q&A that you do, Sam. So yeah, Sam, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
And goodbye from me.